Well, welcome to the 700 Club. Using water as a weapon, the government of Iran is forcibly withholding water from its own people as part of an ethnic war. Iranians have taken to the streets in protest, and now many throughout the country are calling for a regime change. So how are the mullahs responding? With live bullets and internet blackouts. So the world can't watch their brutality. CBN Middle East Bureau Chief Chris Mitchell reports.
Thousands of angry Iranians are marching through the streets of southwestern Awaz, also known as Khuzestan. The people accusing the government of diverting water from their land as part of an ethnic war.
They use the water as a weapon to force or forcibly migrating the Ahwazi people, because Ahwaz land is the heartbeat of Iranian economy, such as oil, gas.
Faisal Maramazi of the Ahwazi Center for Human Rights calls the severe water shortage an environmental catastrophe. Thousands of dead fish, dry riverbeds, and devastated farmland. This shepherd says his flocks won't drink the sewage-filled water. For humans, it's a matter of life or death, as illustrated by this desperate woman drinking from a puddle.
The Ahwazi woman was telling the popular committee, please don't stop coming to our village. We are dying because there is no water. Imagine, in 21st century, Ahwazi people are nearly going to die because of the severe water crisis.
In a violent crackdown, Iranian police are firing live ammunition, killing some protesters and injuring hundreds. Still, the protests continue. U.S. Senator Marco Rubio tweeted, "The U.S. should stand in support of the protesters instead of negotiating a deal with the evil regime in Tehran." That nuclear deal being renegotiated by the Biden administration would give the regime billions of dollars in sanctions relief, and some say clear the way for a nuclear Iran. Other protests are springing up like this in Tehran's metro, calling for the overthrow of the government and death to the dictator. In a significant development, the Azeris, the country's second largest ethnic group in the north, joined the protests over the weekend. And today, people in Tehran also took to the streets. It remains to be seen how far this movement will spread, and some remain skeptical of any regime collapse at this time. Meanwhile, in an ominous sign, the government has shut down the internet in the Ahwazi province. After that move with protests in 2019, the regime killed 1,500 demonstrators.
Chris, this is the worst that I have seen. They've had demonstrations before, but this is really, could this lead to the big deal to change the regime?
Well, it's possible, Pat. I'd say right now there's mass arrests going on right now in the Azawi and the Azeri. These are two different ethnic groups going on right now. But as promising as the protests are, it seems unlikely. There's a lot of opposition and a lot of opposition groups inside and outside Iran. But right now they're not united. But, Pat, you know, few expected the Berlin to fall when it did. You were there just after it fell. And so the liberation of Iran would certainly be a defining moment in history, just like the fall of the Iron Curtain. It does seem like a matter of time inside Iran. The protests are widespread. Many have nothing to lose. And what are they asking for? They're asking for freedom, for regime change, to stop funding these foreign wars in Gaza, Lebanon, Yemen, and Iraq. And also, just a note, Pat, Iran's very diverse ethnically. Groups all over the Iran are very, very diverse. But it's a very important time to be praying for Iran, praying for their freedom, which would have spiritual consequences if it fell. It would open up Iran to the gospel and help ensure Israel's security.
Well, we have a serious presence in Iran. Those young people particularly want to get free from those mullahs. And is the Biden administration looking like it's going to send a whole bunch of money and a new nuclear deal with them?
It very well could, Pat, and that would be a lifeline to a country, Iran, really, it's economically on the ropes because of the Trump administration, the maximum pressure campaign they had. This would give them financial oxygen. There's one report I read that said, you know, Iran had as little as $4 billion in reserves. It could increase to $100 billion if they are allowed to sell the oil on the oil markets. And remember, Iran is the world's leading state sponsor of terror. So this would be funding Hamas, Hezbollah, and other terror groups. If these sanctions are lifted, it would fund terror in the West. And, you know, Pat, in 2009, that was the Green Revolution, when literally millions of people in Iran went to the streets. And the question to the Obama administration then was, are you with us? Are you with the mullahs? Now, 2021, they're asking the question, are you going to support us? Or are you going to give this tyrannical regime billions of dollars in sanctions relief? We'll see what happens. The negotiations are going on with the nuclear deal. The ongoing protests are going on. They're going to need international support, and they're certainly going to need our prayers there for the people crying out for freedom inside Iran.
Chris, what could we do to speed that thing up? What do you think?
That's a great question. First of all, I think people should be praying for the people of Iran, that they would have the freedom that they really deserve. And, you know, the people in Awazi, they're really getting ethnically cleansed almost because they're shutting off their water. I would think that hopefully the Biden administration would stand not only in support of their ability to protest, but to stand in support of against the regime, the crackdown, and stop the billions of dollars that may go to Iran if they lift these sanctions off Iran.
Thanks, Chris. You know, isn't it incredible, ladies and gentlemen, the Biden administration is actually asking the UN to send a team to study America in relation to racism. I mean, come on. I mean, look at what's being done in these various countries to actually destroy the Uyghurs, to destroy the Iranian Christians. And we're asking people to the UN to investigate us. I mean, come off it. Well, in other news, America is drawing down its forces in the Middle East, leaving Afghanistan in August. So what about operations in Iraq? John Jessup has more.
Thanks, Pat. The U.S. military will end its combat mission in Iraq this year. President Joe Biden and Iraq's prime minister set to make that announcement at the White House today. The U.S. pulled out of Iraq in 2011 during the Obama administration, but the rise of the Islamic State forced a return in 2014. Meanwhile, in Afghanistan, a new report says more women and children were killed and wounded in the first 6 months of 2021 than in any year since 2009, when the UN first started recording those statistics. The rise in civilian casualties comes as the Taliban is aggressively taking territory on news of the U.S. pullout in August. Well, turning now to the latest spike in COVID cases, reportedly up 300% since mid-June. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention now considering new mask mandates and questioning if the vaccines already given are enough to protect against the Delta variant. The CEO for a company that helped develop the Pfizer vaccine has told the Wall Street Journal, quote, antibody levels are dropping 7 months after immunization among some vaccine recipients. Dr. Anthony Fauci told CNN a booster shot may be needed for people with weaker immune systems.
Those are the kind of individuals that if there's going to be a third boost, which might likely happen, will be among first the vulnerable.
Health officials warn the spike in cases is mostly among unvaccinated people. Well, some positive news from the Census Bureau. The number of two-parent families is on the rise in America. In the mid-2000s, only about 2/3 of families included both mother and father in the home, leading some to write off traditional families altogether. But as Mark Martin reports, the nuclear family is making a comeback.
It still hurts, and I see that. And in some ways, it's pushed me to be a better father than maybe I would have been. I don't know. In other ways, I see the deficiencies of what I don't know to do because I didn't have them.
While Christian hip-hop artist Legend still feels the effects of growing up without his dad, he uses his experience to help others like him.
A lot of times in my shows, I say, man, raise your hand if you grew up without a father. And there's always half the crowd. Doesn't matter what the crowd looks like, white, black, and it's always half the crowd.
We are beginning to see signs of hope, however.
A research psychologist and senior fellow of the Institute for Family Studies says results from the U.S. Census Bureau are encouraging when it comes to the status of two-parent families.
Nicholas Zill says recent statistics show the percentage of children living with two parents has gradually improved, passing the 70% mark in 2020. He tells CBN News it marks a sea change because experts had been seeing the traditional nuclear family as a thing of the past.
It's going to be replaced by a menagerie of alternate family forms, single-parent families, blended families, all sorts of varieties. And for a long time, the experts seemed to be right. It was declining from nearly 90% in 1960 down to about 2/3 in the mid-2000s.
Zill goes on to say the rebound reflects the largest percentage of children living with both parents in 30 years. So what's behind the increase?
A growing proportion of the child population comes from families that are evangelical Christians, Orthodox Jews, other groups that are more committed to traditional two-parent families. And we also should point out a number of immigrant families, including especially those from Asia, Indian families, Pakistani families, Philippine families, which show a greater propensity to have stable two-parent families.
Zill also says people looked at the positive results of two-parent families.
And people put two and two together and said, the conventional wisdom is right. It is better for children to have both of their parents in a stable family, in an upbringing. And it's not only better for the individual children, it's better for the community. It's better for the neighborhood. When there are other married couples to look out for kids, it results in lower crime and higher school achievement.
Another finding in his study that Zill calls one of the most encouraging developments is the increase in the number of African-American high school seniors being raised by their birth fathers as well as their birth mothers. That percentage rose from 24% in 2012 to 30% in 2019. Mark Martin, CBN News.
Thanks, Mark. Pat, a welcome and positive turnaround.
Extremely welcome. You know, the Marxist idea is to destroy the nuclear family any way it can. And there's been an assault on all kinds of family units, on all kinds of sexuality. And to see this coming back, despite the efforts of those who want to destroy America, is very, very welcome. You know, that's what God said in the early days, you know. It isn't right that man should be alone, and I'm put him in the family. And the Bible says, the Lord about whom all families are named. He is the original father of everybody, and the family is his invention, and it works very nicely.